Booked and then come take my hand. We're rebels with a paperback plan.
Welcome, listeners, to Booked and Banned, the podcast, where we discuss essential literature that has faced challenges and censorship. Our book for this episode is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. Timothy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining. Please tell our listeners a little bit about who you are.
Hi, I'm Timothy Richardson. I'm a tax preparer and investment advisor. I attended New College of Florida and studied economics, and I'm a big fan of art of all kinds, and I'm really excited to be here.
Well, thank you again for joining. So let's put the book in context before we jump into the questions. The Master and Margarita is widely considered one of the greatest masterpieces of the 20th century, not just for its wild supernatural creativity, but for the incredible story of the book's survival against the Soviet machine. The Master and Margarita is a complex, polyphonic novel that weaves together three distinct narrative strands. The first strand is a satirical look at Moscow. Satan, yes, I said Satan, disguised as a mysterious foreign professor named Woland, arrives in 1930s Moscow with a chaotic retinue, including a giant vodka-drinking black cat named Behemoth. They wreak havoc on the city's literary elite and greedy bureaucrats, exposing the hypocrisy and corruption of the Soviet system through dark, supernatural pranks. The second strand is the biblical strand. This is the novel within the novel. Interspersed throughout the Moscow chaos is a retelling of the encounter between Pontius Pilate and Yeshua HaNozri. In other words, Jesus of Nazareth. Unlike the Gospels in the Christian Bible, this version focuses on Pilate's cowardice and psychological torment, framing the story as a philosophical meditation on guilt and power. And the third strand is the romantic tragic strand. The master is a nameless author who has been driven to a psychiatric clinic by the state's rejection of his novel about Pilate. Margarita is his devoted lover. She makes a deal with Woland, becoming a witch and hosting Satan's midnight ball to reunite with the master and save his soul. The history of the book is as dramatic as the plot itself. Mikhail Bulgakov worked on the manuscript from 1928 until his death in 1940. Knowing full well it could never be published in his lifetime. During the Stalin era, which was 1928 to 1953, Bulgakov actually burned his first draft in 1930 out of fear and despair, later recreating it from memory and notes. Under Stalin, literature was required to follow socialist realism. A book featuring the devil, a sympathetic Jesus, and a scathing satire of the Soviet state was considered counter-revolutionary and dangerous. While Stalin personally protected Bulgakov to an extent, Stalin famously enjoyed Bulgakov's play The Days of the Turbans, he also ensured Bulgakov remained a non-person in the literary world, unable to publish his most important work. After Bulgakov died of kidney disease in 1940, his widow, Elena Bulgakova, hid the manuscript for over 20 years until 1966. She survived World War II and the remainder of Stalin's regime while keeping the papers safe. Following Stalin's death, the political climate slightly relaxed under Khrushchev. In 1966, a version of the novel was finally published in the magazine Moskva. However, Soviet censors cut roughly 12% of the text, removing politically sensitive descriptions and any hints of the supernatural that felt too subversive. However, the censored portions were printed by hand and circulated underground. This is called samizdat. Readers would manually tape the missing pieces into their copies of the magazine. Or in some cases, like Anna Akhmatova's poetry, they would memorize samizdat to keep the state from seizing it. The first full, uncensored version of The Master and Margarita was published in West Germany in 1967. The Soviet Union did not allow the publication of the complete original text until 1973. So, with that context, let's get started. I sometimes struggle with Russian literature, but I found this satire very, well, entertaining in its way, in the same way that Nabokov is satirical sometimes.
Yep.
Timothy, tell us why you chose The Master and Margarita. Why this story?
Sure, absolutely. So I had a Russian literature kick as a young man. I read Anna Karenina in high school, and then I went to an unusual college, the New College of Florida, where there was no GPA, so you could take courses in any subject matter, and it didn't matter if you were going to get a good grade. So with my econ degree, I took several Russian literature electives because I really enjoyed it. But it was the hardest college classes that I took because it's hard to keep track of everything that's going on and the themes. Anyway, this I read a bunch of it, and this was my favorite one, I think by far. I also love Dead Souls, but this one was just a big page turner for me. It felt modern and exciting and at times hilarious and poignant. And that's why I chose it for this theme here.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Woland famously tells the master that, quote, manuscripts don't burn, unquote. A line that has since become a global mantra for artistic freedom. Given that Bulgakov actually burned his first draft of this book in a moment of despair, how does this theme of indestructible truth change the way we view the act of creation under a totalitarian regime?
Well, I think it's interesting to consider the upheaval that Bulgakov experienced during his life. He saw the end of Tsarist Russia. He saw the October Revolution, many years of Russian Civil War. There was so much social change that came along with all of that. He had works published in his early career that never would have been published in the Soviet era. So I think for him, it felt that the winds of change were always blowing and that the time for his work would eventually arrive, even if it was completely untenable. I was born in 1991, so I grew up with the internet. Are you familiar with the Streisand effect from Barbara Streisand?
Vaguely, but why don't you tell our listeners about it?
Okay. Barbara Streisand did not want the picture of her house to be on Google Street View. So I think she filed a lawsuit to get it removed. I don't know if it's counterculture or what it is, but the effort to remove the picture of her house generated lots of internet attention. And then people were sharing pictures of her house. So it got way more attention through the effort to remove it than it ever would have had otherwise. That definitely reminds me of the idea that it's hard to strike something completely off the internet, but even before the internet, it's kind of hard to get rid of ideas that have been carefully safeguarded for the right time.
Yeah, I think that phrase, manuscripts don't burn, because we know that they burn. We know that paper burns,
Right.
but the ideas that are in them, you can't burn those. And by
Right.
trying to get rid of them, you do draw more attention to them. That's just what happens with banned books. A lot of them get a sales bump when a school district or a county or a legislature tries to ban them. It has the
Yep.
exact opposite effect.
Yep.
So, in the biblical chapters that retell Jesus' trial and execution by Pontius Pilate and the Romans under his command, the narrative insists that, quote, cowardice is the most terrible of vices, unquote. In a world where Pilate chooses his career over an innocent man's life, why do you think Bulgakov prioritized cowardice as the ultimate sin rather than cruelty or greed? What was he trying to say about cowardice in the face of Stalin's purges? He purged ultimately 20 million citizens through famine, executions, and deportation to the Gulag.
Absolutely. Well, Bulgakov, his father was a lecturer at the Kiev Theological Academy, um, quite learned in the Orthodox Church. I was trying to look at the perhaps biblical inspiration for this because my initial research and my Catholic upbringing, I didn't remember cowardice as the greatest of vices. I was unaware of this. The one part of the Christian Bible that I could find was Revelations 21:8 that said, "But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death." The cowardly are listed first there, which I think is interesting. It doesn't say that it's the greatest, but it is listed first with a lot of undesirable characteristics. But I think as far as his personal life and what he lived through, I think cowardice is what allowed a lot of that social reorganization that was ultimately so terrible and caused suffering for so many. At all times, the Russian people would have greatly outnumbered the political machine that was making these gulags and sending people to them and things like that. But of course, there was great risk at speaking up or organizing against it or even saying anything about it to anyone else. So I think the cowardice from his perspective is what allowed the cruelty and the greed to flourish because it was going unchecked by the people at large because of the great personal risk that they would take.
How do you make that choice, to stand up and not be a coward when you don't know whether other people will stand with you and whether you can get to that critical mass where you cannot all be killed by or overwhelmed by the state and its
Right.
machine? It's a really tough choice. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Bulgakov uses Voland's retinue, especially the cat, Behemoth, to Soviet bureaucracy to absolute slapstick chaos, from exploding heads to vanishing clothes, to an empty suit that is still signing papers, to money that changes into wine labels. Why
Yep.
do you think Bulgakov chose this kind of absurdist comedy to critique the state rather than writing a straightforward or realist narrative?
Great. Yeah, I don't know if you can see Behemoth here. Let me just grab it real quick. I've
Oh,
got
awesome.
I've got Behemoth over Red Square. This is a concert poster from a musician that I enjoy, and I saw it in his web store. But I would say I think the absurdism was inspired by the absurd things that were actually happening. In the novel, there is the foreign currency store where you can only go and purchase things if you have foreign currency, which it was illegal for the Russian public to own foreign currency. So, of course, the store was intended to only be used by, tourists. But they have a guy in there who is pretending to be a tourist so that he can use his ill-gotten foreign currency, eat the finest fruit and fish that the ordinary Russian people would never be able to have the chance to buy. You got awful poets and novelists who are venerated and given comfortable positions for producing propaganda, and you've got absurd confidence about lots of political reorganization that was not necessarily in the best interest of anyone. So I think from Bulgakov's perspective, the absurdism was everyday life, and this was kind of a way to show that and react against it.
I particularly liked the empty suit that was still signing the papers because
Yeah,
that was kind of the faceless, nameless bureaucracy that just keeps going. Even
right,
though there's no real heft to it, there's nobody there. And going back to Behemoth, I love the scene where they go to the literary writers, all the poets and authors. They had like a club and a restaurant that they could go
right,
to. And the cat, Behemoth, shows up there and gets into an argument with someone about having an ID card. You're not an author unless you have an ID card. And he says something about all you have to do is read 5 pages of Dostoevsky to know that he's a writer. I'm paraphrasing. He
right,
didn't need an ID card. And so I thought that was really, really interesting that he's arguing, but also that the Soviet state had tried to say, who's a creative person and who's not through
right.
issuing a card rather than letting their work speak for itself. It was
Right.
really interesting.
Yeah.
So the novel suggests that in a society where the rational state has become insane, only the irrational, the devil, magic, and the supernatural, can restore a sense of justice. What do you think Margarita's transformation into a witch as a way of reclaiming her agency in the Moscow of that era? And does she best Woland, or is merely allowed to seem to have bested him?
Well, I think Margarita represents, she's very willing to turn into a witch. She's excited about it. It's not really a trick, I don't think. And I think she portrays a lot of Bulgakov's fantasies, including his revenge fantasies. She's invited to Satan's ball. She gets on the broomstick and she's headed to Satan's ball, but first she's got to visit the critic Latunsky's flat, who represents the critics that said all kinds of terrible things about, well, in the novel they're talking about the master, but clearly they represent the critics that excoriated so many of Bulgakov's works during his lifetime. She gets to the critic Latunsky's flat. She destroys everything he owns, including his defenseless piano, and she makes a mockery of her lecherous neighbor, turns him into a pig ridden by her maidservant. So I think Margarita as a witch, she is she's getting to play out some of the putting into their proper place that Bulgakov desires. And I think that that is something that not only does it allow Bulgakov to express some of what he would like to see, but also kind of puts the character of the master in more of a sympathetic light. He doesn't have to inflict any revenge wounds directly. He's just focused on his novel, and he lets the devil and Margarita sort of right some wrongs in his. And as to whether she bested Woland or she's merely seemed to have bested him, this novel is heavily influenced by Faust. My understanding is that you deal with the devil, you end up regretting it. That's usually what happens when you sign a contract with the devil. But I think the Master and Margarita end up in a quiet, isolated part of the afterlife, neither in hell nor heaven. And I think it represents their intense desire to be left alone. There was war, critical campaigns against his work, very real terror of being sent to the gulag or executed. He just wanted a quiet place to be with his beloved and study or read or whatever he wanted to do by himself. So I think they kind of come out on top. I think that's a happy ending for them given everything that they've experienced. So maybe I'm wrong, but I think they came out on top on the deal with the devil this time.
I think they did too. It still is a story of how love triumphs, right? Because it's Margarita's love for the master that she makes this deal with the devil. She hosts Satan's ball and all the attendant. I mean, there's a bloodbath, like a literal, she's bathed in blood in preparation for the ball.
Yeah.
So there's some weird stuff going on there. And in the end, they're not awarded heaven, but they're awarded
Right.
peace. Right. And it sounds like a little bit like the Catholic concept of purgatory, other than I don't think there was any repentance involved. I think that's the purpose of purgatory is you're supposed to be
Right.
repenting while you spend time there. But
Yep.
they're not going to have to repent. They're just going to be left alone, to be left alone together as lovers. That sounds wonderful and a fitting end to the story as a way for Bulgakov to have enacted some revenge against his own critics, but he just wants to be left in peace. He didn't see World War II, but he saw World War I and all these other things going on. And so just life in the Soviet Union was not peaceful. And he needed that and wanted that.
He also didn't want to leave his native country either. The offer from Stalin may not have been legitimate, but Stalin asked him if he wanted to go abroad and he said that he didn't. So I could see, since he didn't really have any options in the real world to publish all of his work, he couldn't publish it in Russia. He didn't want to go to London or anywhere else. I guess this quiet corner of the afterlife was about as good of an idea as it could be, away from society and able to live his life with his lover.
Well, and Elena kept his work safe.
Yeah.
It took a long time, but she kept it safe and she was able to eventually get it out, which is amazing. I mean, I think that's a real tribute to how she felt for him. So, what is the final legacy or message that you want our listeners to take away from reading this book?
Absolutely. Well, it gets back to the line that you already mentioned, but I think even if the truth is being obscured by powerful forces at the present time, it's time will come, and I think that is an exciting message that you don't even if you don't know the truth now, it may eventually become known. It will eventually become known. I think that is an exciting idea that I hope is true.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. Well, thank you, Timothy, for coming on the podcast. Our next episode will be a discussion of Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. And I appreciate all of our listeners joining us today. As Isaac Asimov said, any book worth banning is a book worth reading. Thanks.
Thank you.
Booked and banned and bound by pages, stories hiding through the ages, whispered truths that still ring clear for those who choose to listen here.